Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and today I'm reviewing Mariposas from Elizabeth Hargrave and AEG. Mariposas is a 2 to 5 player game of, well, migrating butterflies, plays in roughly 60 to 90-ish minutes, closer to the 60-minute range, and it's a game of migrating butterflies across the map in an effort to score as many points as possible by completing specific goals. You're going to have spring, summer, and fall goals, and then you'll have endgame scoring, which includes a few things, but getting your butterflies back to base where they started. The general gameplay structure is that every single round you're going to be playing action cards. In the first round, in spring, you're going to have 4 action cards played. In summer, you'll have 5 rounds, and in fall, you'll have 6 rounds. In each round, you're going to have 2 action cards in your hand. You're going to be picking an action card and playing the action card, which will define how you're moving your butterflies. Before we go exactly into how and what and all that, the general idea is there isn't a set destination in mind. This is not a game where you're trying to get all the way from the bottom all the way to the top. Rather, you're trying to follow certain goals, spring, summer, and fall goals. You're trying to be mindful of the various reasons and incentives for your butterflies to wander around the map, but they are ambiently wandering. You're moving them from place to place, location to location, not necessarily going to the edge, but there are reasons and incentives to go to the edge, and different things that you're trying to do and accomplish along the way. You're trying to move your butterflies, you're trying to migrate more butterflies, producing or hatching more butterflies, so you can get a bunch of them on the board, and eventually, at the end of the game, having them all return home, where you can get a chunk of bonus points, all the way up to 24 bonus points, for having a bunch of butterflies back at home base. Now that you know the general goal, instruction, and incentive, the actual round, like I said already, in spring you'll have 4 rounds, and each turn consists of looking at your hand of cards, picking a card, picking one of these 2 cards over here, and then moving your butterflies however that follows. So for example, this card over here is 3 separate movements of 1 each. Now you could use the same butterfly multiple times, you could use different butterflies. So for example, I can play this and go 1, 2, 3, and along the way pick up those 3 specific flowers, gathering 1 and 2 and 3, adding those to my pool. But additionally, on another turn, I can go ahead and play this card over here. That card is a single movement of 4, but I also get to pick up the thing next to it. So for example, if someone else plays that one, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pick up this over here, because that's what you landed on, but also any of the ones adjacent to it at the same time. So you have those options too. In general, the cards are going to give you movement that can be split amongst either the same butterflies or different butterflies as you move around the board. And every turn consists of playing a card, moving a butterfly, and then doing whatever else happens next. As far as what happens next is that you're going to be collecting flowers of every spot you land on. And again, we have a bunch of cards we can go through over here, move 2 butterflies, 2 spaces each, and then land. And again, it could be the same butterfly, move twice, move 3, 1, move 1, 5, move 1, 4, and collect 1 next to it. Reuse an action card someone else just played. Move 3, 1. You can see over here, you can see the general idea of the various cards you have. Those are going to be the primary cards you have and you're playing. And you're trying to move around the board collecting flowers and other things. The other things we'll get to in a second, but before we do, why do you want flowers? Well, the reason you want flowers is apart from the fact that sometimes they are worth endgame scoring depending on what shows up in fall, you're going to also want flowers because of the fact that flowers are required to hatch more butterflies. You can see a little chart over here. To get a generation 2 butterfly, you're going to need 2 of the same flower or any 3. Generation 3 will be 3 of the same flower or any 4. Then for 4, any 4 or any 5, and then 4 to a double 4, we'll explain that soon. That's going to be again 4 or any 5. Flowers are the primary way that you're trying to make your butterflies have more butterflies in the game, which is important because when you move from spring to summer, you will lose all age 1 butterflies. When you move from summer to fall, you'll remove all age 2 butterflies, so you kind of want to make sure you actually have these butterflies spawning across the game or you will be in trouble. You'll never be without a butterfly at all because the game does make sure to give you a free hatch every single round as well. So in age 1 to 2, you'll hatch a 2 and you'll hatch a 3 as well. So you will always have those free hatches along the way. You'll never be lost without any butterflies at all, but you still need to be on top of it. Past that, what you're doing as you move along is how do you actually hatch? Well, every time you land next to a milkweed spot, there's going to be little milkweed spots on the board. Whenever a butterfly lands next to one, so for example over here, if you have the requisite butterflies, 2 of the same or any 3, you can go ahead and hatch a level 2 butterfly, taking it from this gold card first, and then later from your supply once they run out, putting it on top of that spot. You now have 2 butterflies on that spot, although they do move separately. You want to be mindful that having multiple butterflies on the board means they will move separately, which is important for the goals because this is a good time to talk about the goals before we continue everything else. This spring goal card over here, which will be evaluated at the end of spring, at the end of 4 turns, says that if you have 2 butterflies on the board, and there are no butterflies beneath Atlanta being over here, so if all the butterflies you have are above this spot over here, you'll get 4 points. Additionally, if you have butterflies occupying those 3 colors, you'll also get 4 points, which means if you have 3 butterflies, you can get a total of potentially 8 points from this card, and 8 points is not an insignificant amount of points in this game. And so you're trying to be mindful of the goals as you see them, and the goals will slowly unlock as the butterflies are removed from the summer and fall cards. Those will eventually unlock, showing you what you need to get for summer and fall as well, giving you different objectives and things to go for more spots around the board that you're trying to get butterflies on. And in the case over here, we have a point for every butterfly above Toronto, and we have points for whenever a 3 butterfly turns into a 4 butterfly above Atlanta, you get a double 4 right away, so you get to skip a spot of the sequencing of hatching. So you have all these goal cards you're trying to be mindful of, but we haven't yet finished talking about everything else here, because like I mentioned already, when you land next to a milkweed, you have the opportunity to hatch. Additionally, when you land on these spots, you're going to turn them over. If I landed on this spot right now, I would turn that over, I would take the specific card that matches that, in this case this card over here. This is going to be worth a point at the end of the game, and if I have a set of all 4 blue, I also get this ability. That's true for these rows as well, so you can get abilities and points, potentially 12 extra points plus some abilities for collecting all these cards around the board. And additionally, for being the person who discovered that, who basically just found that spot, I get to roll this die and take whatever flower shows up there. So when you land in those spots, in these way stations, you're going to get that benefit as well as the potentially random flower. When you land next to a milkweed, you have a potential of hatching, and when you land anywhere else, you get flowers. And yes, on some of the higher spots on the board, you will find 2 flower spots, which can be another incentive to getting people up there because you can gather more flowers and thus hatch more things. And that's basically what's going on in the game. There's a few other things to talk about, but the general idea is you're moving butterflies around, trying to be mindful of the specific goals you have in the game, trying to meet those goals by moving your butterflies ambiently around the board, being mindful of the fact that the goals will constantly change. There's a stack of goals in the box, so every game is going to be a little different in terms of what you're doing, where you're moving, and then eventually, and you don't want to lose track of this, you do want to make your way back home before the end, because if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 butterflies, you'll get that many points, not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you'll get 3, 7, 12, 17, 21, or 24 bonus points at the end of the game, which can be an absolute chunk of points. And this is where we talk about the 4 butterflies, because the 4 butterflies, when you hatch the first time into a 4 butterfly, you have a single 4, but when you hatch a 4 into a double 4, this counts as 2 butterflies, but it moves as 1, which is very helpful, especially endgame, when you get to the end and you think 6 turns is enough to get your butterflies back home, but you planned poorly and they're all the way at the top of the board and you do not get them home in time, which can be giving up a giant chunk of bonus points that you will regret later. And that's Mariposas. Move around the board, play your cards. You're going to have 4, 5, and 6 turns in each season, trying to accomplish those goals, trying to be mindful of endgame scoring, trying to collect sets of cards so you can get these bonus abilities over here. Some of these way stations will give you other things in addition to these. Sometimes you'll get these little bonus cards, you'll get other flowers, there's other things in these way station cards, and that is basically what is happening in the game. Which brings us to the review, starting off with ease of play. This is a fairly easy game to go into. The rulebook is fairly clear, fairly precise, has some educational information in it as well, but overall this is a fairly straight sequential game. Have 2 action cards, play an action card, do that 4 times, score a goal, do that 5 times, score your goals, do that 6 times, score your goals. A few other facts to be aware of, but the general structure here is fairly straightforward, fairly streamlined. Gameplay comes in, like I said already, roughly 60 minutes, very accessible game. Table space is not that much, it's what you have here, plus everyone having their own little pile of butterflies in front of them, really not that much going on. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, starting off with what I like. The game is charming. The game is charming as you ambiently move around the board, and there is ambiently moving. This is not a game with a destination. This is a game where you're just kind of fluttering from location to location as you grab a flower, as you hatch more butterflies, as you go onto a way station, as you try to collect sets, as you get little bonuses here and there. The game is charming in its simplicity and its accessibility. You draw 2 action cards, you play 1, and the ambient fluttering around combined with the goals that you have, which give you a bit of a reason and a destination to flutter here, to flutter there, to grab these various cards. It all gives you a reason and incentive to move around the board, but not necessarily to move everywhere, but to move enough around the board. Go further out and you can gather more flowers, you can hatch more butterflies, you can accomplish more goals. Stay a little closer to home and you'll get points at the end of the game. Achieve the balance of those 2 well and you'll end up winning at the game because you managed to score more points than other players. And it always feels like you could do something. You can move a little higher, you can get double flowers, you can wander into a way station, you can hatch another butterfly, you can score that goal, you can go for that goal. This goal over here, you can get 2 points for being on yellow cities above Chicago, but you can get 3 points for being around Winnipeg, you can get 2 points for being around Boston. That gives you a chunk of different things to go for, to strive for. The game, to a certain extent, can punish people for randomly being in one spot versus another when it hits that mid-game point, but it often gives you enough things to do that there's always something to do that gives you a reason to move forward, that gives you a reason and a thing that you are accomplishing as you go. As far as what I don't like, it's a little too ambient at times. The ambient is great in terms of the accessibility, in terms of giving you just a general fluttering around, but it feels at times that the destinations are not necessarily as important. Like I just said a second ago, on the one hand, I like the fact that there's always something to do. On the other hand, this game does not start you off feeling like there's a destination. This game starts you off feeling like you're just moving. And then at a certain point, you have a reason to move here, over there. It's a little bit more ambient than I would necessarily like. It's good in some senses, but a downside in giving you a little less strategic focus as far as what you're doing. And it also leads into it not necessarily being as interesting in the choices you're making. But spawning butterflies on the one hand seems like a driving force in the game, and yet there are there are optimal ways to migrate your first batches of butterflies, clear optimal ways based on the goal cards at play, and so the decision making in this game does feel very much on the lighter end. And the end game can be anticlimactic. The end game, especially as you get to the end, as you try to rapidly rush home, it feels like it falls into more of the same pattern every single time. The points you get from being back home are large enough that you kind of don't want to ignore those. But that means that it does fall into a pre-scripted pattern of exactly how you pace the game. You move a little bit out, you try to be mindful of the goals, you hit the end game, you come back home. It falls into a very quick pattern of the optimal way to play the game to score as many points as possible, as efficiently as possible. And so it is a very accessible game in many senses, but on the one hand, that accessibility comes with the trade-off of a degree of heavier strategy that I would want from the experience. As far as what I can see others not liking, the fact that you can't prepare for the goals can be frustrating. One thing we didn't really heavily talk about, but first time you spawn butterflies, they always come from the goal cards if those are there. And so it does mean that sometimes you'll be walking into a season halfway through or whatever it is, and you realize you don't actually even have all your butterflies spawned. There are times where you don't get to see what you're going for until it's too close to the end there, and that can be frustrating because you're trying to move around trying to prepare for things, but what if you can't actually prepare for things? And so that lack of being able to prepare around things could be a drop frustrating, as can be the randomness of the waypoints. Now, not so much the goals. I did mention already, I like the fact that the goals, especially the mid-game goals, often give you multiple things to go for, such that anyone, assuming they're positioned somewhere on the board, often can go for something. But I will say the waypoints in general have a lot of randomness. Trying to collect sets of cards and wandering around from location to location, the game does reward you with that die roll every single time you explore a waypoint, and that's partially because of the fact that you're going somewhere random, but it does have a large degree of randomness as far as what waypoints there are out there. I find with the waypoints, it is very often helpful to either go for as many as possible, because you get those extra random die rolls, plus you also get the actual cards themselves, or alternatively going for as few as possible, going for a very precise, very scripted set of cards. And so those waypoints definitely add a degree of randomness to the experience. Randomness that adds to the whim and the exploration of it, potentially takes away from some of the strategic choice or reason to go for some of those things. As far as final thoughts on Mariposas, this one is a 3 out of 5 for me. I enjoy the experience. It is a fun game. I do not mind playing this, but it also doesn't give me that high of why I'm actually really diving into it. The game feels ambient in a way that feels very relaxed and very, very engaging and very accessible, but also relaxed in a way that isn't the experience I'm necessarily looking for. I think this is a solid gateway game. I think the game is charming. It looks beautiful. It has great little, wooden butterflies. It has solid little trays for the tokens. It is very accessible, very well produced, very easy to teach, very easy to play through. This is a solid, accessible game with set collection, with ambient moving, and with enough things going on to tickle the taste buds of a strategic adventure, while also not being so much that it really pulls me in quite as much. I think this is a solid gateway game, one that I can easily recommend, but for me, past the unique theme, it is accessible without being overly engaging. A 3 out of 5. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, Wingspan from Elizabeth Hargrave. Wingspan, I think, is a game that gives you that same degree of accessibility, but doing so with, I think, a little bit more engagement and a little bit more of a rewarding engine on the same game. And so I think Wingspan is a great choice, one that I'd recommend over Mariposas if you're looking for something to dive into. And if you're looking for something that rewards a degree of moving around the board in a way that I found significantly more strategic, well, Istanbul from AEG, from the same publisher, AEG, Istanbul, I find, is a game that is significantly more engaging, still accessible enough to be a little gateway friendly, but has a lot more depth to the strategy as you move around the board in different pathways and try to craft your movement and your structure forward there. In any case, and until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. I hope you found this review helpful, and as always, I hope you have a good one.